Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome none other than the next. I ain't going no further. None other than the next. None other than the next. I'm going to let him take it from there. God bless you. Give it to him.
Please sit down. I got to go on his radio show. He only had 6 people stand up. He's going to give it to me next time. You ever listen to his radio show? His callers, I don't even know why they call in sometimes. As soon as they start talking mess, starting ignorance, the black eagle spreads his wings. But we know the history of our country. We know what black radio has done for us. It has always been the creator of community, inspiration, nurturing, information, and really, we literally, I'm not exaggerating, talked about you in my office today when we had our team communications meeting, because when we talked about what our strategy was on the Supreme Court justice, we said the show we need to go on and talk about the elements of this over the 2 to 3 months that this evolves is this gentleman's show. So would you give it up for Joe Mass one more time? And I just want to say really something about Dr. Steele. First of all, he is the president of this organization, which makes him my favorite president in Washington, D.C. But that is a very low bar. So let me say a couple more words. There's something I worry about. And I'm glad my friend Brittany is here because we have some generational issues within the black community, and I want to just say it like it is. The struggle that my parents' generation was engaged in and involved in, to break down barriers. I am here because of organizations like the NAACP. If there was no NAACP, there wouldn't be no me. I am here because the Urban League in this city went to work to open up doors so my dad could be the first African American hired in his position at Woody's, Woodrow and Latham. Then first African American hired by an oil company called Sinclair Oil in his position. And then became IBM's first African American salesman in the entire Northeast region. My father would tell you, and he went on to be their top 5% global salesman, but he would look me in the eye and say, boy, I worked hard, I had grit, but I got where I am because of organizations like this. And so when I get to see 60 years from its founding, that there are still people that understand the urgence and importance of this organization and stand up and lead this organization. And remember and know that the challenges we face right now have their roots in the ongoings of the 1950s and 40s and 30s and 20s. And so I as the 4th popularly elected African American in the history of our country to the United States Senate. Come on. Before me was a man named Barack Obama. Before that was an incredible woman from Illinois, Carolyn Mosley Braun. Before that was Edmund, you all know, Senator Brooke. Every time I walk on that Senate floor, I owe a debt. And I can't pay that debt back, but I've got to pay it forward. And so when this man calls me to do something, he thinks I'm doing him a favor. I am not. I'm paying my time and energy. I am always here for you. Now I'm coming down because I don't feel like because I don't need to be to folk who are the foot soldiers. We all know that change does not come from Washington, it comes to Washington. We know that every single gain we have made in this country has not come because a bunch of folk in Washington thought, it's about, and it wasn't a bunch of men in Washington thinking, yep, it's about time women have the right to vote. No, it was protest, it was fight, it was grit. We know it wasn't Strom Thurmond who just sat there one day and said, you know what, those Negro people should have their rights. No, it happened because of grit, struggle, sweat, blood, death that got us there. Frederick Douglass, whose biggest portrait in my office is a portrait of Frederick Douglass, and he said it very simply, if there's no struggle, there is no progress. And so reject the great man theory of history, reject it. We are here today because of Americans who understood their power, did not fall into the trap that Alice Walker talks about, where she says the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place.
All right.
And so it's very important to me today. I want to break some stuff down, and I'm going to take an approach that you may not expect, but I do want to say first and foremost that there has to be this humility right now. There has to be a humility right now, because we are up against the arrogance of meanness. We are up against folks who relish in their being unkind. But we've got to go a lot deeper and be a lot more focused. And we've got to see folk. I was trying to say this exactly when I came in, but you see on your program, it's rooted in faith, fighting poverty and injustice. Well, the poverty I'm most concerned with is not a material poverty. It's a poverty of compassion. It's a poverty of empathy. It's a poverty of action. And I want to let you all know. So I'm growing up as a young boy. I cannot tell you the debt I owe. I grew up in a town in northeastern New Jersey because of another group in the 60s called the Fair Housing Council that sent my parents out to buy homes and set a sting operation, sent white couples behind them after they were told homes were sold. And so we were the first black family to integrate this neighborhood. My dad called us the 4 raisins in a tub of sweet vanilla ice cream. And my father, by the time I'm 18 years old, high school All-American football player, but I'm president of my class. I got into Stanford because of a 4.0, 1,600, 4.0 yards per carry, 1,600 receiving yards. My dad would see me walking around the house with a lot of swagger, and he'd say, "Boy, don't you dare walk around here like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. You drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that you did not dig. You sit eating from banquet tables prepared for you by your ancestors. Don't just sit here getting dumb, fat, and happy. You need to understand that you got to metabolize those blessings and get back to work." Come on. And so when I decided as soon as I got out of school, I decided that I would go to a low-income community and stay there. This wasn't like an experiment, go there for a month or 2 months. I'm the only United States senator that lives in a neighborhood where the median income, below the poverty line, $14,000 per household where I live.
Listen.
And folks there are rich with character, rich with spirit. I take reporters, tell them to walk with me in my neighborhood. You'll see how great this people is, the grit of the community. You will see that often the greatest American heroes exist in places where the American dream and the American promise is not being made real. You see people who are fighters. I've lived there now for well over 20 years. But when I first moved there were some high-rise projects. I was a lawyer representing tenants against slumlords. And I was there in the basement of a building I would move into for 20 years. And this had a legendary slumlord. We eventually helped to get convicted in federal court for his crimes. This building was in tough shape, and we were there for a meeting. I'm trying to collect signatures and collect data for a complaint I was going to file. And this incredible tenant leader, a man named Frank Hutchins, one of the most legendary tenant organizers in Newark. He led a rent strike in the 70s, the longest rent strike in the history of our city, and won. He beat the federal government, the Newark Housing Authority. And he was there and took me under his wing, but we're in this meeting, and it's one of those meetings, the first hour I was getting a little fidgety because I'd gotten all I needed, and the second hour, now I'm getting a little tired. The third hour, I'm just like, come on now, how many people need to get up on this microphone and speechify? And I'm looking at Frank Hutchins, this elderly man who was not a great speaker, wouldn't fill up a room, but had this kindness and this decency about him. There was a long group of people sitting up front. He was sitting over on the side. Every speaker that went up, it was as if they were the first speaker of the night. He looked at them and leaned forward. By the end of the night, the speakers weren't speaking straight. They were speaking at him. I'm sitting over here shifting and stuff like that, and they were speaking to Frank Hutchins. I get out and I make some snide comment. Oh, gosh, I don't know if we could have gone any later, Frank. And Frank looks at me. He goes, "Corey, you need to understand. This isn't just about fixing the physical building. These folks have experienced a type of violence. There's trauma in this building. People deserve to be heard. They deserve to have a chance to speak their truth, to be listened to be acknowledged, to be validated." We've got to heal a community here. Frank was one of my best and earliest mentors. I say I got my BA from Stanford, but I got my PhD on the streets of Newark from some great professors. Now, Frank would get older. They would eventually get me to run for city council. Frank would get sicker. Eventually his eyesight went, but I would still go pick him up, take him to grocery shop. He used to always insist, let's go to the movies. I'm like, Frank, you can't see, man. But Frank would educate me. I just need to sit and I don't need to hear the environment. And every time I would see him, I'd say, Frank, it's Corey. I wanted him to know who just knocked on his door. He'd open the door, and I'd say, Frank, it's Corey. And he'd be like, I see you. And I'm like, you don't see me, man? But that became our thing. Frank, it's Corey. I see you. Frank, it's Corey. I see you. Well, Frank got older. I became mayor. And now I'm mayor of the city and still going to take my friend Frank out. And eventually he's in hospice. And eventually it's his final days. And I go in to see him, and I have to say, this is my ego. This is the ego I have to check, because I was upset. He was a man that helped thousands and thousands of people, but there weren't that many people visiting him. And my ego's like, I was like, come on. This is one of the greatest heroes I have ever met. Why isn't there thousands of people lining up to love him and to tell him what they did? But that's my ego. Frank Hutchins never did this because of, he was more concerned with significance than celebrity, more concerned with purpose than popularity. He lived his life as if to say, it's not how many people who show up at your funeral that matters, it's how many people you show up for when you're alive. And so on the final day, I go in and the hospice workers tell me that he is getting sick and he may not make it. It's not going to be long. They tell me he will pass soon. And I walked in, and some of you might have been around folk that his breathing was shallow and rapid. He could barely talk, but I walked in that room and I said, Frank, it's Corey. And he forced it out. He said, I see you. And I sat by his bed, talked to him, held him, kissed him on the forehead, kissed him on the cheek, told him what he meant to me. And then when I was getting up, he hadn't said anything, been able to say anything. But when I gave him that final kiss on the forehead and got up to stand up, I said, Frank, I love you. And I knew it was important to him, and he forces out, I love you. And so that's what I want to frame, the things I quickly want to say is his last words. I see you, I love you. I see you, I love you. I see you, I love you. We have a sinister force in this country, and we cannot demonize individuals. I can talk, this is the SCLC, so I can talk from my faith. God didn't call us to demonize individuals. He called upon us to create a beloved community. With radical love, to love my enemies. Radical love. And I worry that in our country right now, we have so many divisions between us. We have come to hate people who have different political beliefs. We've come to ignore and marginalize people into invisibility, where we don't even see the crisis right in our midst. I see you, I love you. And so when I read that we're going to talk about poverty, the first thing I want folk to realize is we don't even see what's going on and sourcing poverty in our country.
Come on.
Almost 50% of Americans make less than $15 an hour.
Come on.
We live in a nation right now where it is the economic stress is so widespread. If you're a baby boomer in this country, 90% of baby boomers did better than their parents economically. 90%. We live in a nation right now that if you're a millennial, it's just 50% a coin toss. But if you're a millennial in certain geographic areas, you're struggling because everybody in this room knows minimum wage hasn't kept up with inflation or productivity. If it would, it'd be $20 an hour. Everybody in this room knows that everything is going up. Cost of prescription drugs going up. Child care is going up. Cost of college is going up. The rent is too damn high.
Yes.
But we don't even see even deeper. My time in the Senate, coming from where I come, I've been trying to say that we need to fight for a justice that's deeper than this and call out the causes of this economic inequality. It's not just raising the minimum wage. I want to see it at $15 an hour. It's not just shifting what we see is happening with corporate America, which has an 80-year high profits while wages are a 65-year low. I want to address that. A lot of the things that are on the progressive agenda in this country, I want to talk about those things. But living where I've lived for 20 plus years, I want to mention 3 other things. There's this interrelation between the things that are causing us to live in such an unjust, poor society. And the first thing I want to talk to you about is environmental injustice. People don't seem to understand that it's these toxic conditions in which people live that are undermining their economic strength and vitality. When I was in city councilman in Newark, New Jersey, there's a lead epidemic we saw in our city. What does lead do to physically to your body? It addles the brain. You don't even need to have lead poisoning to have permanent damage, just elevated blood lead levels. Now, a lot of people want to talk about Flint, Michigan. Yes, that concerns me. I am outraged. I am hurt. I am saddened. But Reuters reported that there's over 1,000 jurisdictions where the children have twice the blood lead levels than Flint, Michigan. And in my city, in Newark as well as Camden, kids have to drink out of bottled water in school because the water's not safe to drink. We tried to I planted tomatoes in my suburban backyard. I tried to do entire blocks of urban gardens. I did it, but I had to do it in planter boxes because they told me we could not plant in the soil or eat anything from the soil because the soil has toxic lead. We don't talk about Superfund sites. This is a nation that right now Superfund sites in our country, these most toxic sites, are increasing. Why? Because the mechanism with which we used to pay for them, which Ronald Reagan reauthorized, Mitch McConnell voted for. This wasn't a major headline, but that mechanism lapsed, and the Senate refuses to reauthorize it because we're in this time that Grover Norquist and others signing this pledge, no taxes. Well, as a result of that, our cleanup of these sites is going down, and the number of sites is going up. But we have something we didn't have back in the 70s and 80s with Superfund sites. It's called longitudinal data. We can now study what happens to people who live around Superfund sites. I live within 5 miles of 2 Superfund sites. Why? Because I live in a poor community, minority community, which have disproportionate levels of Superfund sites within their regions. If you are a child born around a Superfund site, you have a 20% higher rate of birth defects, 20% higher rates of autism. And what about asthma? The number one reason why kids miss school, health reason kids miss school in America, is asthma. And asthma, you have asthma as a kid, your performance in school goes down, which means what? Your lifetime earnings, my grandfather used to say, the more you learn, the more you earn. The less you learn, the less you earn. We are raising children in toxic environments where we lack the will to do something about it and the awareness that it's even going on. And it's not just in Newark and Camden and inner cities. I have taken a tour throughout the South, through the Black Belt. Started in Duplin County. You know how many people have to live in places like Duplin County? Now, Duplin County has like 9 million pigs down there in North Carolina. And these massive pig farms that have reduced pig farmers to sharecropper-like lifestyles. And pigs produce 10 times the excrement than human beings do. And they don't have any place to do it. They're polluting rivers, polluting streams. They put these in these massive CAFOs. And here I was in Duplin County, this African-American community, and when I met with folks packed around a table to tell me what was going on, because I watched the spray fields where they try to spray this stuff, I smelled the noxious air, I saw it misting over into communities, and people tell me they're prisoners in their own home, that they can't open their windows, they can't run their air conditions, can't put their clothing on the line, and more than that, they have higher respiratory diseases, higher cancers because of these toxins. I went on up in the mountains of Alabama to a town called Uniontown, Alabama. There were people for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment that were taken from that community. Well, guess what? When I sat in the black church packed to the rafters, not because people wanted to see me, but because people were so surprised that a federal official was coming down to listen to their pain. Tallahassee, Alabama was the same thing, packed to the rafters. People said it's like they're taking whole communities now and injecting them with toxins. In Tallahassee, it was a toxic waste dump. They have no local control. It was placed into their communities. Now, they literally went around telling people, don't eat the fruit from your trees anymore. Property values of the land's gone down. Cancer rates going up. I went off to a place called Cancer Alley. These African-American low-income communities between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Cancer rates off the charts. That one I couldn't fight back the tears. In this small black church, people packed in that stood up and told me how many members of their family have died of cancer. Environmental justice is intrinsically tied to the problems of poverty in this country, and we do not talk about it enough. But let me move on. My time is short. We have issues. Health care and poverty are intrinsically tied as well. There are people in this nation who still, even with the Affordable Care Act, are declaring bankruptcy because they can't afford their medical bills. There are thousands of people all over this country who put life-saving prescription drugs to the side because they can't afford to pay for them. We have a massive healthcare injustice that every day, because we have backward systems that often cause more illness, that cause more cost. Young lady who lives in my community, I just took her sons months ago to see Black Panther. She has 3 sons. And guess what? You live in an urban community, you know one of them at least has asthma. If you're an African-American kid and a white kid with asthma, guess what? The black kid is 10 times more likely to die as a result of asthma. Why? Access to treatment, access to care. African-American woman, 2 times more, 2.2 to be exact, times more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman. Access to care. And so here was Natasha, my friend, who works in an IHOP, $2.13 an hour trying to raise kids. My grandfather worked in the Ford auto plants. Henry Ford said, I'm going to pay my workers enough so that they could buy the products. Well, guess what? Natasha lives on food stamps, works a full-time job and catches extra shifts and still needs food stamps. But here's the healthcare inequities. Her sons cross the street on Bergen Street in Newark, cross the street and can't afford to leave her job because she doesn't have paid family leave. Her son is in the emergency room and she now has to make this choice. Do I stay at work or do I go across the street and lose a paycheck to be with my child? I could go through the healthcare inequities. But I see you, I love you. Do we see the pain that Americans are in, who are living in physically toxic environments, divorced from their water, from their air, from the soil in the ground? Do we see the struggle of people every single day struggling with their health care inequities? But let me finish this last one. We do not talk about it enough. We do not know enough about it. We hear the words about this, but do we really know what's going on? And the last one you cannot divorce from poverty is mass incarceration. This has killed this country economically. The entire nation, forget separating it by race, the entire country. Vanderbilt University study that if we had incarceration rates the same as their industrial peers, we would have 20% less poverty in America. Why? You all know this. If one person has an arrest record, and remember, the criminal justice system is not equally divided. People are like, we need to legalize marijuana. We have had de facto legal marijuana for a generation in America. In privileged communities, no one gets arrested for marijuana. I went to Stanford. You could buy lots of different drugs at Stanford. People smoke pot and laugh and joke about it. It's funny, ha-ha. But in communities where, like I live, no difference between blacks and whites for using marijuana or dealing marijuana even. but 4 times more likely to be arrested for it. And if you're arrested for marijuana, it is a lifetime sentence. Now, you may only serve a little bit of time in jail, but when you come out of jail, according to the American Bar Association, you're facing 40,000 collateral consequences. What's a collateral consequence? Well, you all know what it is. You're in Newark, you have an arrest record for marijuana for doing things that 3 of the last 4 presidents admitted to doing. You can't get a job at a fast food restaurant in my town. You can't get a Pell Grant. You can't get a business license. You can't drive a cab if you have a marijuana arrest. And this is what you lose your voting rights in many states. In the state of Florida right now, 1 out of every 5 African American people cannot vote in the state of Florida because of felony disenfranchisement. The economic impact it has from having an arrest on your record could cut your lifetime earnings by dramatic percentages. And when I say that folks don't know what happens, you want to judge a society, judge it by who they incarcerate. Look, I was over in Turkey. They incarcerate the press over in Turkey. There are people arrested and in jail for fake news, they call it. Where they get that slogan from? You want to go to Russia? They incarcerate their political opposition in Russia. We may be yelling, lock her up, but at least we haven't done it yet. But in America, who do we incarcerate? We incarcerate the poor. We've made poverty a crime in this country. There are people in jail, thousands of people in America right now in jail, children in jail, simply because they can't pay bail and get out. And you add to that the fact that we incarcerate not just the poor, but we incarcerate people who need help, not prison, people who need healing, not prison, because we overwhelmingly incarcerate mentally ill people, we overwhelmingly incarcerate addicted people, and this is the one most people don't know. We overwhelmingly incarcerate the sexually abused. 86% of women in prison are survivors of sexual trauma, survivors of rape and physical abuse. I went to a federal lockup in Danbury, Connecticut, and I asked the warden, this tough warden, she was on the verge of retirement, and she's a hard woman, she's a good woman, great leader. I said to her, how many women in here have been survivors of rape? And suddenly she looked vulnerable. I don't know if she didn't expect the question, but she looks at me and she says, I think 95% of my women have. And what do we do to these women? We do things that make it harder for them to heal on the way out. We compound their trauma. I was going to get a tour of the prison, but I got stuck in the cafeteria just talking to women, letting them shock me. I was a United States Senator. I never heard these kind of stories. I didn't know women had to put aside buying sanitary products so that they can call their children. I didn't know we shackle pregnant women when they're giving birth in the United States of America.
Listen.
I don't want to get stuck. I want to bring my remarks to a close, but I say all this stuff to tell you this. I miss Obama. Okay? Now hold on. I miss Obama, and I miss her husband too. I miss her husband also. But there's nothing that I just told you that came about with this Trump administration. I want to call you out on that. Everything I just said was going on under the last president. And this is what I'm talking about, giving one man all of our energy. Because I know that Trump is not there because of a lot of the reasons folks say he is. I learned this in Newark, 2008. I go to vote in 2008 for President Barack Obama, soon to be president, then it was senator. And in Newark, there was a line around the place. I mean, everybody was showing up to vote. I come up to the end of the line. Now, I don't know where y'all come from, some genteel, some nice communities. My community, I love my community. I love them because we keep it real. I'm the mayor of the city. I'm rolling deep. I got police officers all around me. I get to the end of the line. The woman at the end of the line looks at me. She doesn't say, great day, mayor. She doesn't say, oh, what a historic moment. She looks at me and she says, don't you think you're cutting in this line now? I don't care who you are. You ain't special. And I look at this woman, I got cops next to me, I look at her and I go, yes, ma'am. 1 year later, just 1 year later, it's a gubernatorial election. We have an incumbent Democrat running against a guy you all never heard of him. His name's Chris Christie, y'all never heard of him. And I go to vote, and nobody's there. Not a person is there.
Come on.
And I go in, and the poll worker behind, I walk around the table and hug the poll worker because she looks so lonely. And then I come out, I watch the returns at night, and Chris Christie edges out the incumbent Democrat. And then things start happening. They start happening. Planned Parenthood is cut. People are like, why are the Republicans doing it? Aren't the Republicans so bad? They cut the earned income tax credit. He ran pledging not to raise any taxes, but he cut the earned income tax credit. And people are like, oh, those Republicans are so bad. I hate them. And then he pulls out of the regional greenhouse gas agreements. I told you about our asthma problem. Oh, those Republicans. Cut funding for cities. Trenton laid off 1/3 of their officers. We had to lay off 12%. Oh, those Republicans. Why are they doing this to us? I look at people, I'm saying, what are you talking about? They didn't do this to us. We did it to ourselves. Martin Luther King said it. What we have to repent today for is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. We have all the power we need to change the problems that afflict this country, and we know this. Why? Because at the end of the fire next time, James Baldwin has said it. He said, I know what I'm asking you is impossible, but in today's day and age, the impossible is the least we can demand. And one is, after all, emboldened by the spectacle of human history in general, and Negro history in particular, for it is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. And that's how I want to end. I want to tell everybody here, we know the prescription for the challenges, but we're losing sight. We don't understand our power. We don't understand what we need to do. We can study our history and see how we overcame impossible things. And sometimes, and I see it now, people are descending into despair. I see it now. People hugging me in the airport, and I understand, I feel their pain, crying in the airport with me about how bad things are. Yeah. They're letting people pull them so low, and we're hating those people who are trying to destroy us. I want to just end with the last story of how I faced with a situation. Walking in my neighborhood in 2004, young man is shot. Hear the gunfire. Run, and I don't know if anybody's seen what it looks like when somebody's shot. I took time in the Judiciary Committee today. All my colleagues were rightfully talking about Supreme Court justice, the separation of families, but I just said, look, I want to talk about gun violence right now because it seems like we only talk about this after mass shootings, I said in the committee today. But I'm just coming after the 4th of July, and some of you might come from communities like mine. When firecrackers are going off, not everybody's celebrating. People telling me stories about children hiding under beds because of gunfire being so regular. Thousands of people being shot in this country every single month. And it's not a glorious thing. It's not like the movies. Blood pouring out of this boy's chest. I'm trying to stop his blood. Foamy blood coming from his mouth, reaching in, trying to stop this kid from dying. I talked to the police director from my opponent in the mayor's race. He saw me, you were in trauma, he said, I saw you out. You were shaking when I saw me. When the ambulance pushes me out of the way, I knew this boy was dead. I went back that night and scrubbed this boy's blood off of my hands, started crying in that sink, anger and rage. I was so mad at our country, and I'm telling you right now, if this country has not broken your heart, then you don't love her enough. Because this country, as great as we are, we don't always do right. That's right. I got in the shower and turned that water, and some of you all know, sometimes you're hurting so much on the inside that you turn the water so hot, you hope the pain on the outside could dull the pain on the inside. I went to bed that night, Got up the next morning, and many of you know this too, that sometimes courage doesn't roar. Courage isn't the big speech or the battle cry. Some days in your life, courage is just getting out of that bed.
Come on, man. You speaking.
Putting your clothes on and walking out that door is courage.
That's right.
And I went down in that elevator, and as soon as I got into the lobby, I remembered that this was the lobby where my tenant president, an elderly woman named Miss Virginia Jones, this is where her son was murdered in the 1980s. And she never left those buildings. Her son was murdered. She and I were two of the highest net worth earners in those buildings, and she never left. This wise woman, when I asked her why she never left, she goes, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. She didn't underestimate her power. And I'm hurting as I walk through that lobby, and I get into the courtyard. It's early in the morning, and I see her across the courtyard, and she has her back turned to me, but I just stop. And I look at her, she's like a light, but I'm 100 feet underwater, drowning, choking, angry. Darkness has swallowed my heart. And I'm looking at her, hoping that she'll turn around, and she hears me, and she turns around, and this elderly woman sees me, and she does the only thing that I need.
Come on.
She opens her arms like this.
Yes, sir.
Now, I'm 6'3". I got the same doctor as the president, so I'm only 200 pounds. But this is a small woman. She's 5 feet and a smidgen tall. But yet I run her across that courtyard like a little child and jump up into her arms. And she holds me tight. And I start crying.
Well.
And she starts rubbing my back and says two words over and over again.
Come on.
And these are the two words I leave you with today. They're two words I held on to when I was fighting in Newark. Two words I held on to on my toughest days as mayor. Two words I held on to in the campaign for the United States Senate. Two words I repeat to myself sometimes when I'm on the Senate floor and I feel like I'm banging my head against implacable walls of resistance. They're two words I had to repeat when I heard that Justice Kennedy was retiring. The two words I had to say when I saw that this man could roll back voting rights and civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and end the pre-existing condition and elevate corporate power. I repeat these two words. What she said is she rubbed my back and held me over and over again. She simply said, "Stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful." And I'm telling you right now, we have come this far by faith. And faith without works is dead. And if we work and give our faith, we may be small and our faith may be the size of a mustard seed, but we can move mountains. And don't tell me something is impossible. We have come this way over impossible terrain. And I know if we stand together, if we work together, if we sweat together, if we struggle together, if we help together, if we love together, I know that our faith will bring a new day in this country where justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. God bless you. I see you. I love you. I see you. I love you. God bless you.